Well, we're back, if you can believe it or not, for another segment of The Grassy Knoll. And the show will be heard the week of July 16th, and with us for his monthly visit is Kent Daniel Bentkowski. And, Kent, thanks for coming back, and what in the world is going on?
Well, thank you kindly, brother. I appreciate the opportunity to come back once again and speak with you and your listeners. And today what I wanted to talk about is a movie that is very important in terms of truth-telling, and this is the John Carpenter film, They Live. In addition to that, I just wanted to make a brief couple comments about the Live Earth global warming concert that had taken place over the weekend.
Groovy.
Basically, what I want to say about this is that people listening, please do some research on global warming. This is a very important issue because it does represent a perfect example of how the elite and the politicians mislead us and misguide us and push us into directions that are not helpful to us as people and also as inhabitants of this planet. In fact, if we look at global warming in terms of physics and quantum mechanics and also in terms of thermodynamics, none of the science makes any sense. And that tells a lot of us who have analyzed these statistics and this data that these scientists put forth about these global warming issues that this is false data, that it's not supportable by science. And when we start thinking about why they might wish us to think incorrectly about this issue, we start to understand that there are some hidden agendas going on underneath the surface here. One of which involves a global taxation scheme that had just been announced by Al Gore in the past week. And this would basically be a tax on carbon emissions and would harm the individual to the point where they would be almost forced financially to give up their vehicles. This also pushes us into a situation where we have these cities that are going to be springing up where we will be herded into these cities and will be forced to use this very expensive public transportation in place of our current automobiles and so forth that we use now. And so, again, I implore everyone to look into global warming and to look into both sides of this, because sometimes people want to trust the authority figure. They want to believe what a scientist is telling them. But these scientists are being controlled by these organizations that are controlled by governments, and they have a lot of reason to follow what the politicians are asking them to tell us. And so that's my 2 cents on that.
All right, not to straying out too far, but I'll say this. You know, this is probably the 4th time around for me that I've seen everybody freak out, you know, for about 5.5 weeks about global warming. Oh, but this time, but this time it's really real. Look, you know, the people who are perpetrating this are the same ones who run petroleum and everything else. We're not going to be getting off oil because they have the oil. They're just going to make it unbelievably expensive. We're going to have another war, and they're going to run that on oil, so it's going to be available. I don't want to trash the planet. I want to take care of it. But I've also now realized, too, that there's been a whole lot, as you said, spin on certain things to get everybody into a Chicken Little freak-out babblehead. The sky's falling, we're all doomed, we're all going to die. like maybe 3 years if we don't do this, that, or the other. No. And, of course, yeah, they bring out all the rock people, and, that just warms my heart. The only thing I got to say, too, with this is that, you grab... I mean, who the freak is Al Gore? I mean, he disappears for, 2-3 years, grows a beard, wears a plaid shirt, I guess, or something, I don't know, flannel shirt or something. And now he comes back and he's like, Grizzly Adams. Kiss my ass.
Yeah.
He's a whore. They take him, they tell him, Al, this is what you're going to do. And Al's like, yeah, okay. He can't drool fast enough. He becomes a spokesman for this. Run. Hey, you can tell I'm not very emotional about this issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing about this, too, is that, and this is a fact, and people can check into this, because this really, as far as I'm concerned, puts this issue to bed permanently. At the present time, our solar system is rotating ever continuously through the universe, and we are entering what is known as the galactic center of this system. This is where all the major energy comes from in our universe. And because of this orientation of our solar system into this area of high photonic energy, the entire solar system is heating up right now. This is from increased solar activity and other intergalactic events that are happening at the present time. And so this is not just something that's for Earth alone. This is not something that is necessarily even going to destroy the inhabitants or the environment of the planet, because what's happening here is this is a phenomenon that is affecting the entire solar system, not just Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, as far as I'm concerned, that puts the issue to bed, because once we realize that this is a phenomenon that is part and parcel of ongoing life in this universe, this is not something that Earth is experiencing for the first time.
No.
And these people like to make it out like we're the fault. For instance, I drive an SUV, so therefore it's my fault, and it's not the fault of the big corporation that's located in Niagara Falls near my home that's spewing out all this garbage and emissions and pollution into the air. Those industrial polluters are having a much more detrimental impact than we are as individuals to begin with. And so they like to make it out like it's us, because the solution to all of this is going to be to tax us and to choke us with these taxes, so that we will literally be forced to make a decision as to what's more important to us, owning and driving a vehicle or paying for something else in our life.
Understand that, it's ironic too, Ken, because I had a guest on last week who spoke to those who had developed systems that could get you 100 miles per gallon.
Yes.
Some that would run on water. It was all possible. And am I for it? Absolutely. If I can prevent putting something into the environment that the environment didn't want, to put in by itself, fine. But that's not the case. That was all killed. Why? To stay on oil. So what I'm saying is, behind the screen, you've got the oil oligarchs who are running this thing and also whipping you in a Hegelian sense, but with all you dirty SUV drivers. So, they run it from both sides. But I will say this, we will live our lives out. I don't care how much longer anybody goes. I don't care if it's 40 years, you'll still be on oil, believe it. You may not be driving, but they'll be running vehicles on oil, and they won't be running on water. And the reason why is because they know exactly what they're doing, the oil oligarchs. They've been living for, generations, wanting control of everybody, and they're not going to foul their lunch bucket either, which is our Earth. So, watch. Another thing I want to let you know, and I'll email you this also, what we were talking about before we get on the show was they'll leave everything alone, but they will start to tax and control people for being hyper consumers or consuming more than they produce in an index. Everybody laughs about that. Folks, check out this title. We did a show on this a couple years ago, maybe twice we did it. It's called Understanding and Solving Environmental Problems in the 21st Century. And the subtitle, Toward a New Integrated Hard Problem Science. That is Understanding and Solving Environmental Problems in the 21st Century. And when you take a look in there, they will show you the indices that they're going to use to find out just what kind of quality of life you have. Oh, it ain't going to make me sleep well at night. So,
yeah, that's very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll send that to you, but you should avail yourself of it, because when you see how they're going to quantify, and that's the game from here on in, to reduce everyone to statistical data and see how you come out on the plus and the minus side, and God help you if you come out on the minus side.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll say about the Live Earth concerts is it's interesting, the comment that you just made about the oligarchs and so forth, because the Live Earth event was a Rothschild operation from beginning to end. So that proves what you're saying here is accurate and probably will be very truthful as we go forward and start to see some of these taxation schemes come into play.
Oh, yeah, and I tell you, if the Rothschilds are behind it, it's got to be for our own good.
Oh, absolutely. They're looking out after me and my family. I know that to be true.
Well, like Cool Hand Luke said, why don't you stop being so good to me? I get all I can take. Enough with the glow.
Yeah.
All right, now, the topic for today, which is something that, it's really interesting. I mean, when you see movies that come to you and on a certain level, and yet they're really an allegory, and they can go, down 2-3 levels. We did something, of course, with The Wizard of Oz. Eyes Wide Shut, you took care of. And now you're coming back with another one that looks like one thing on its face, but indeed is telling you something else. So, what's the story on They Live?
Yeah, They Live is a very interesting film to me, and I often describe it as a nonfiction documentary. And I know that's slightly provocative type of a statement, but when on the surface here it looks like a low-budget sci-fi horror type of a film that talks about hard times for people and homelessness, and they can't find jobs and so forth. And the central character in the film is played by an ex-pro wrestler, Rowdy Roddy Piper. So on the surface of things, it doesn't look like a serious film at all. It looks like, something you'd see in the middle of the night on Cinemax or something, in the middle of some horror festival or whatever. However, when we start digging into the meat and potatoes, as it were, of the film itself and the message and the allegory, we start to understand that this is actually a deeply rooted concern of the film director, John Carpenter. And what happened is in 2002, in the summer of that year, a friend of mine and myself, who had been discussing all different types of films, and we had been dissecting various films to take a look at what they might be telling us, we suddenly started to see that used and brand new, still sealed copies of They Live were being offered on Amazon.com for upwards to $500 per copy. And that was for a completely factory-sealed, brand-new copy of this film. Previous to this, you could get this thing on DVD for $10, and sometimes less, depending on what store you went into. So in the summer of 2002, this film went out of print, and there were a lot of rumors as to what was going on here. Why were these copies on Amazon suddenly, $100, $200, $300, $500 a piece? It didn't make sense, and I started looking into this. My friend and myself, who were already discussing this, one night we were talking, and he said, well, why don't you contact John Carpenter and find out what's going on from him directly? And I'm like, do you think I could do that? And he said, sure. Why don't you go to the Director Guild of America website and find out who his representative is, contact them, and ask for an interview. And so it was kind of like a little, dare, if you will. Why don't you see if you could do this? And it sounded interesting, so I went to the Directors Guild website, found out that his representative was a man from the William Morris Agency in Beverly Hills, and I started typing a fax. And I sent it to this agent, and I explained to him that I was a journalist from Buffalo, New York. I was looking into this movie, They Live, and I wanted permission to contact and interview John Carpenter about the film. And so what happened is, about a week later, I get a phone call from John Carpenter's assistant, and she says, we received everything from the agent, and John looked at everything, and he's quite interested in what your take on this is, and he wants to get together with you about this. So we made arrangements for me to fax over some interview questions, and that begun the process at that point of me digging deeper into this movie to find out, what was going on, why was it out of print, and what were some of the reasons that it might be out of print for. What were the reasons that this was happening? And so what ended up happening here is I eventually made contact with Mr. Carpenter and had a very interesting exchange with him about this. And what I was told was that this movie was in reality about Reagan and Reaganomics in particular, and about the uncontrollable, conspicuous consumption of the 1980s. When this film was released in 1988, we were in the middle of the Reagan 80s, and just getting to the point where, Bush Sr. was going to come into the picture.
Not that this matters, but can we agree on this?
Yeah.
I know all the things that have been attributed to Ronnie. Mm-hmm. Ronnie, of course, was electable and a great-looking guy and a real affable person. Apparently, he is one of the most likable individuals you've ever seen in politics.
That is correct.
But let's agree also that he was forced to take Daddy Bush as his VP and was forced to go out during a convention late one night and announce it, which stunned so many people. And we also know that Ronnie got shot by a family member, a member of a family who supported Daddy Bush, and that was the Hinckleys. My point is that we really do have Daddy Bush in a, 12-year reign.
Yeah, that's correct. And as a matter of fact, the Hinckleys were not only, friends and associates, but John Hinckley Sr. was an actual business partner of Bush Sr.
Yeah.
As well.
So, when we hear all these things about Reaganomics, it's like, yeah, nice, but it's, baloney. But still in all, there was a certain tack, obviously, that economically that was undertaken by the administration, everybody else at that time. And let me just add one thing, too, which I thought was really interesting. Peter Rodino, who was a representative from New Jersey, and I was living in Jersey at the time. I think it was probably around 85, 86, toward the middle of the second term with Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
And he just wrote, he said, guys, nothing for nothing, but why in the world do you want to strike down the Sherman antitrust laws for whatever teeth they had in them? He said, when you've just gone through the greatest amount of mergers and leverage buyouts there's ever been in the landscape of economics in America. So what you're talking about at that time of consumption, and I tell you what, Kent, do you remember the movie, what was it, Wall Street with Michael Douglas?
Yes.
Do you know?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when that famous statement, that little clip by Michael Douglas when he said greed is good?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many yuppies that I would, be in their midst for whatever reason, actually embrace that as like, like a war cry? I mean, they didn't see it as being facetious or sarcastic. It was like, yes, this is an affirmation of what we're doing.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when that movie came out, I, at that time, was working as an investment banker. So I was involved in the stock market as my career at that time. So I lived that every day, and how that affected things in terms of the office setting for us who are trying to get people like you, for example, to invest money with us. That's what I was doing during those years, was to play up on all this like it was some sort of golden goose payoff at some point where you were going to make millions of dollars here. And it was, promoted as being a good thing, that money and looking out for number one was the rule of thumb for that time.
And Kent, didn't they really build it to a crescendo? Because my wife and I finally went into mutual funds wanting to be very prudent,
Mm-hmm.
and we went into it, so they got us, it's a great time to get in, and we got in, and then they cut us off at the kneecaps in 1987.
Yep.
With that was that a Black Friday? I forget,
Yep, yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That hurt. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, they did the same thing in the spring of 2000 with all the internet and the computer investment.
The dot-coms and all that,
taking place with the dot-com boom. And, we don't get those emails that say, you need to pull out before this Tuesday or else you're screwed pretty much.
Yeah, I was sorry to really find out that though we thought we were doing the right thing and not being greedy, that mutual funds were the long haul, but I've come to realize that it is true, screw what they say, that there is a time to get out.
Yeah,
and of course, we know too late, when that time is, but mutual funds, forget it, folks. When we pulled out of everything. I only could take 2 heartbreaks in my lifetime. That was enough.
And it's very difficult to even try to tell people what are good investments anymore.
No.
Because of this, because I'm very hesitant to tell people, other than what I personally have done. What should they do, for instance? I have no idea. Do whatever you think is the right thing, just like I did.
Oh, that's great. I know neither does Kramer, but he just fakes it,
Yeah, exactly. And
all right.
So we have this movie here that, is from the words of John Carpenter himself. It's about the 80s and all the ridiculous spending and everything, and the lack of responsibility that was going on during that time. And during this film, some very interesting things are shown, one of which is referred to as subliminal advertising. And these are advertisements that, in the context of the movie, are shown as billboards or pages of ads in a magazine, for example, that might tell us to buy a particular kind of computer or to go on vacation. And when the character that Roddy Piper plays John Nada, N-A-D-A.
Isn't that telling?
Zero.
Should we take anything from that name?
Yeah, absolutely. That was supposed to represent a person being worthless.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Right,
yes.
Nada. Okay.
Nada. Zip. And because of this, we would be shown these subliminal aspects of these advertisements where it would say, marry and reproduce, obey, all of that type of thing. And this was shown over and over again, but only if you were wearing these special sunglasses, which were referred to as Hoffman lenses. And the interesting thing about that is that was kind of a tip of the hat to Albert Hoffman, the individual who synthesized LSD in the 1940s.
That's great.
And that's where he got the name Hoffman lenses from.
Oh, baby, yeah.
He would have this unheretofore experience and depth of perception, which also has been reported as part of the psychedelic experience of taking acid. And that has been mentioned many, many times throughout the years. So in this movie, we also are shown a homeless group of people who are congregating under a thruway overpass. And this is in Los Angeles where all this is going down. And what's happening here is we're seeing that, these people have finally come to the realization that they've been sold out as a country, that all the good jobs are gone, and they've gone from America to some other unnamed country. And a lot of these people are just completely lost because they have no way of replacing this income. And so this is an entire underclass that has sprung up within this societal structure. At the beginning of the film, John Nada walks into a social services office, and we hear over the PA system that the food stamp program has been suspended because it's overused or overtaxed. And I don't mean taxed in the IRS sense. I mean overtaxed in the overused sense of the word. And, so all the benefits are all messed up, and many, many more people need help than the help that they can offer. So this also says something about our government, too, which is, when the time does come to pass, when we do see this in the real world, which will happen because these elites show these things through these movies constantly, we will find out very quickly that our government will not be there to help us at all. In fact, it'll be quite the opposite, where they will actually be highly detrimental to us instead of offering this hand that they like to pretend is helpful to us.
Let me stop you right there if I could, okay? For three things. One, was this movie, was this based on any literary work?
Yes, it was. It was based on a short story that was published in November of 1963, and it was a short story called 8 O'Clock in the Morning by Ray Nelson, and this was published in a magazine, the Magazine of Science Fiction and Fantasy, I believe was the name of it, offhand.
What was the author's name?
Ray Nelson.
You know why that's so interesting to me, and I'm not going to get on a digression, but I had done a reading. This is the second time I did it, because it had been such a while, and a lot of listeners weren't around for when it happened the first 2 or 3 years that we did the show. and that was the Winnowing by Isaac Asimov. And again, portending something very interesting about what would come, and it sounded so horrible that, of course, everybody would say, "Oh, that's just science fiction." And really, what it foretells is what I think is turning crops into GMOs, and which is going to definitely kill people because they have no idea what they're eating, and that would winnow the population. It would act differently for all people, and it would seem as if it were an epidemic, when in fact it was in the food. So when you see that happening, and Asimov wrote that in 75, and I'm not saying he was part of this, but, I think I think he knew what the plan was. And then this guy Nelson, who I know nothing of, that would come out with something like that then, especially in 63. I just wrote to somebody who was saying, like, I can't believe when I watch The Outer Limits of the Twilight Zone how much of that is telling us about what's happening today. And my feeling is there's no such thing as science fiction.
Yeah, in fact, I'll be doing a future report, actually 2 separate reports on Star Trek. One is going to talk about the New World Order aspects of the ideas of Gene Roddenberry, and the other is going to talk about the very interesting, very fortuitous showing of what is referred to as Treknology that has been shown on the show first and later appears in our real world. For example, in the very first Star Trek pilot, which was filmed in December of 1964, there's a fax machine on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Oh, yeah.
That's just one example, and there are many, many more. In fact, I came up with almost 100 examples of these little pieces of technology that have appeared since being shown on this series and all the offshoots series as well. And so what you're saying is true. They present it in the context of science fiction to get us to accept the idea just as a concept, and then they have the acceptance by us, and then they bring it out and say, gee, we were inspired by Mr. his wonderful TV show, and so now we have this available. When in fact it was a point of fact that one of the people who was one of the major consultants on Star Trek was a representative of the Rand Corporation. And the Rand Corporation, among other things that they do, being an elite think tank, is that they are chartered to introduce new technologies into the world.
May I ask you, again about Star Trek. I mean, Roddenberry was a 33rd degree Freemason, correct?
I've never been able to confirm that for sure. I've heard a lot of rumors about that, but I cannot find any listing, any photographs, or anything of him associated with that.
Then can we, and that's fair enough, can we agree, though, that he was definitely a one-world proponent?
Absolutely, yes.
And also what's interesting, and the reason we all throw this out about the Freemasonry is because that first show, the pilot, of course, was called, the court-martial of Captain Pike. Pike. Where have I heard that name before? But clearly the Federation, about which, the early shows, at least the first couple of seasons of the old Star Trek was built around, was really what they were talking about, and that is the Federation. And with the Roddenberry, he extrapolated to make it a universe, but in the essence, we're looking at, what he wanted. He might have wanted it right here. I'm going to throw something else out to you, and I don't know if you've heard it before. We had a very interesting time with this. There was an old Pathé News type of a newsreel back in 46 or so, where Rockefeller won the bid to get the UN built Manhattan. They won it out over Boston. And during, I don't know if you've ever heard this with what we did, but during the show, they play a couple of riffs, like as background music,
Mm-hmm.
And it is the Star Trek theme. I don't care if Roddenberry was supposed to have been the composer of that in like 1960-something. I'll send it to you if you do not have it. There's no doubt that they used that in that newsreel, which is creepy as hell. But I kid you not. If you hear it, I don't think you'll have any problem. It's like, okay, but Gene wrote this, did he, in 1960 whatever? I don't know. Anyway, I mean, what does that all prove? That once again, just as you're saying with the movie They Live, based on 8 o'clock in the morning, that both the sci-fi writer and, I guess, Carpenter, who, developed the property, they're telling you something. It's not really science fiction. It's a little futuristic. But it's not. It's science fiction as far as the present. You know what I mean? Like, it isn't happening. But then when you look, or if you look back at works like this, you realize that can you imagine the science fiction we're being given now? Where that will lead to?
Yeah, like Minority Report.
There you go. Yeah,
for instance.
Pre-crime.
Yeah.
You got it. Listen, we haven't said anything about, and I want to hit you with one other thing, but before we go any further, we haven't talked about, there's been some changes with what you're doing, certainly for the better. One, you talk about the website, and now what's happening with podcasting, etc.
Okay, yeah, sure, thanks. I'll be happy to talk about that. Yeah, what I did recently is I started a second website called The Controversy Tapes, and I wanted to have a location that my interviews with you and the other shows that I do, where everything would be centrally located, because a lot of people had been writing me and asking me about this material, and they had expressed an interest in having it available through me instead of having to hunt down all these websites all the time. And so then I started thinking a little bit about the idea of the Controversy Tapes and how I might work that into the everything else that I'm doing. And I, at the end of May, put the very first podcast episode of the Controversy Tapes together and released it. Every Monday, a new episode comes out. These are 1-hour shows, give or take. Some of them are 55 minutes, some of them are an hour and 5 minutes, but they're an average of an hour. And I have 6 of them up there so far. They're available through the Controversy Tapes website, which is controversytapes.net. They're also available through the iTunes Music Store. And I've gotten some very good feedback from the people who have listened to the 6 episodes so far. And I'm going to be having some very interesting guests coming up. I've been working very hard with a group of people that I think are very interesting and have very interesting stories that I'd like to present to my listeners, and just to get them to think about things in a little bit of a different perspective. For instance, the episode that's going to go up today is going to talk about Dr. Max Gerson, Gerson, a doctor who in the 1940s and the 1950s had developed a cancer therapy, which is also effective for other medical ailments. And this doctor had a 40% cure rate in stage 4 cancer. He was shut down by the Rockefeller-controlled American Medical Association. His personal secretary was infiltrated by the Rockefeller family, and Dr. Gerson was assassinated by being poisoned by this infiltrated secretary who had poisoned him with arsenic a little bit each day over a very long period of time in 1958-59. And the reason I'm talking about this issue is because among the other medical problems that I have, I was diagnosed as being infected with hepatitis, and this has given me some liver damage and some liver damage issues. And one of the things that this Gerson therapy takes care of is cirrhosis of the liver, and it regenerates the liver as the oxygenated enzymes from organic foods and a complete change of diet will clear this problem up within 2 years.
Just for my curiosity, and I know we have to move on, what was Gerson's therapy revolved around? Was it oxygenation or?
Yeah, what it involves is the use of organic foods and juices and vegetables and fruits, and a complete dietetic change so that you're eliminating all the additives and food supplements and all the garbage like MSG and aspartame and all that they put into the food to adulterate it. And what happens is when you grind all this stuff down into a juice, for instance, which is just one aspect of this, what happens is that the enzymes within the fruits and vegetables become oxygenated, and that is what filters the liver. And so this is something that immediately cut into the profit potential. And as I learned when I interviewed Howard Strauss, who is the grandson of Dr. Gerson, I was told that the Rockefeller family owns, controls, and outwardly owns all the patents, trademarks, copyrights, and everything to the complete chemotherapy process.
You know, isn't it interesting, though, really, that the family that got involved with the two most ubiquitous products, as we see even today, as we are now in the 21st century, was the Rockefeller family, and what did they get involved with? Petroleum and pharmaceuticals. Try to live your life without either of them. And what's really interesting is, and it's kind of funny because in the bathroom where it belongs, I have a very large blow-up of an ad that was in a magazine back like in 1913 or something like that. And it was for a product called Nujol, Nujol, which was produced by Standard Oil. Actually, the very first application of petroleum was for a health issue. And this was to get little kids regular. So can you imagine jacking a 5-year-old with Nujol? You know, I mean, well, anyway. So the thing is, they get involved in this, John D. and the boys, right from the beginning, and look at the two biggest industries today, oil and pharma.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, that's, you know, people can hit that podcast on your site. What is the title of the show again?
It's the Controversy Tapes.
Right. And what is it? What is it entitled? Gerson or?
Oh, the episode that's going to go up today?
Yes.
It's going to be entitled The Gerson Therapy.
All right. I'm going to kick it back to you, but before I do, just because we're on this thing about science fiction being a portent and not fictional at all, I'm going to tell you folks, I'm not putting this up on the website. It's on my server. If you're listening to this show, go listen to it. I did it as a favor to somebody who was struck by the show, and that is, if you go to my site, Vyzygoth.com/audio, you know, that's normal, /winnowing.mp3. It is not for advertisement, but you can hit the audio file, and let me just say this. It's 5.7 meg. I mean, it's, 20 minutes or something like that. But that is Asimov's supposed science fiction story about the way the population would be culled to make it look like an epidemic, but it was all in the food. So if you want to avail yourself, please do so. And that's a shameless plug, I know, Kent, but anyway.
Well, that sounds fascinating, and I will definitely, I'm typing as I'm speaking here. And,
well, I mean, this is important, and again, what you're talking about today, they live, I mean, the book upon which that is based, 8 o'clock in the morning, that's a short, isn't it?
Yeah, it's only like 5 pages long.
But it's
super short.
But loaded, if not with symbolism, with, the shape of things to come. Mm-hmm. You don't know anything about Nelson, do you?
Just that he was, a sci-fi writer.
He was, okay.
That's about it. He was just one of the names that was around back then. There was also another source of this, too, that Carpenter looked at. In 1986, there was this comic book called Alien Encounters number 6, which was published in April of 1986. This particular issue of Alien Encounters had a story entitled Nada, N-A-D-A, which is the last name of the central character, John Nada, as we were talking about. And this is a comic book adaptation of Ray Nelson's 8 o'clock in the morning. And when you look at the comic panels, you see that there's a very close resemblance between what Carpenter put into the movie based upon what you see on the page of the book itself. And so, between those two sources, that is the whole complete, They Live film.
There's also something else. I'm just going to throw it out for whatever it means. When I had gone back to college in the mid-'90s to get a second degree in English and to get certified to teach 6 through 12, I had an adolescent literature class. I mean, not that this motif isn't used in a lot of other things, but one of the books I read, and I cannot remember who the author was about a child putting on sunglasses and being able to have powers that nobody else had or could see things that nobody else could. And I got to go now and see if I can track that down to see what, in what kind of juxtaposition that story was with Nelson's. Nelson's definitely has to predate. But I just find it interesting that that motif would come up again, and yet, we all know through our whole life it says, well, so-and-so looks through life through primrose, glasses and stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always that idea about sight, vision, and something that alters it for better or for good, for worse. And certainly this movie, based on that book, was, in that genre, but with a little deeper meaning, I think, than a lot of its predecessors.
Yeah,
and
actually, I think that may be like an archetype of the collective unconscious as well.
Yeah.
Just because it does keep coming up so often in different forms.
But nobody really gets it, except for those who, quote, get it.
Yeah, that's very true. It's very hard to determine what's going to get through to certain people. Like, for instance, recently I had published that report on JFK that we spoke about recently. Mm-hmm. And I got a comment this morning from an individual who said that he was a little upset that I mentioned that in the course of writing that report that I had mentioned I had a photographic memory. And that was the reason why I could remember something that occurred the day before my second birthday. And here I'm trying to be honest with people to tell them what is the reason why this was so haunting to me. And here's a person who's using that honesty in my personal explanation as a justification for him to reject what I'm saying, because as he had said, it strained his credulity. He just couldn't deal with the fact that I had mentioned this. It's very hard to determine what's going to get through to people. And what I try to do is I try to be as honest and forthright as I can be and matter of fact about things, and kind of let people make up their minds from there.
Well, the hallmark, unfortunately, of the way things will always be, even on this side of the street, which I mentioned, as far as those who get it, and that is there are charlatans and snake oil salesmen by the score on this side. And people, and I will admit, I was one of them years ago who gave, 100% complete faith and trust in those on this side of the street to realize, I got burnt also. And Harry, who is no longer with us, he's alive, but he's not with the show, chided me often, and he was right. He was a voice of reason. I thought he was, too jaundiced, but in fact, he was right. And now I realize, you got to understand that people are going to ask and probe, but what's the point? Is it to deride somebody, or is it to, try to work out that this, in fact, is the truth, or maybe somebody's off? And, you're going to get hit with it. I get hit with it. Everybody gets hit with it. I even dish it out to others. That is the name of the game that comes with the territory. So if you're clean and you're true to what you do, you'll come out on top. But, I don't blame people for asking. But the point is, why are you asking? So.
Yeah, in fact, I will engage somebody like that in a brief conversation, just to reiterate what I'm trying to accomplish. And, I don't mind any of that stuff. I do realize that it is part of the nature of the beast, so to speak, of what we're involved with. But at the same time, I am also aware of the fact that people use things like the pejorative conspiracy theorist argument as an excuse to ignore certain people, which I think is a mistake. Even some of these snake oil salesmen, one of which, who comes to mind immediately, who has a very overly active capitalistic set of websites, and let's just leave it at that. People, I'm sure, can make up their minds who I'm referring to here.
Alexander the Great? Yeah, okay.
And, even a person like that still has some valid things to say from time to time. And that's what keeps them in the game. So there's just a lot going on here, and it's no surprise that some people are just confused and, they don't know where to turn for good information. And I have been true to myself in the past 2 years that I've been online. Since I came online in June 17th, 2005, I've written 453 controversy papers, and out of that group of material, I have had many of these pieces have been published all over the world, and I've had nobody come to me at any point asking for retraction of information, or that I got something wrong, or that I need to change it, or I'm going to get sued or anything. And that's even me going after people like J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books. And, I didn't even get that from her, so
well, I'll tell you
I must be doing something right.
One of the knockouts we had, last week, as we speak today, and people hear this on the 16th, but the week of July 9th, we had Dr. Coleman come on, who is the author of Conspirators' Hierarchy, the Committee of 300, and not only did he pick up what he said about Theodore Adorno being the brains behind the Beatles, which drives everybody crazy.
Wait, I'm sorry. I need to interrupt.
Yeah.
You had John Coleman.
Yeah, well, actually...
interviewed him?
Yeah. Can you imagine that?
How did you do that?
Magic.
Man, I gotta tell you, I've been trying to get an interview with him for years.
All right, and listen, we can go over the hour if you don't mind. I mean, I don't want to keep you longer than you want to stay, but, you know, if all right, I'll tell you straight out. All right, after we do this interview, since we are taping on the 9th, you can go and listen to him. What happened was I was a supporter of his a while ago, years ago.
Okay, all right.
And, you know, I subscribed to the newsletter. I also answered Joel Skousen's call out that Coleman had been very ill and had, you know, Magondo hospital bills, and I sent money his way. We were supposed to do a show, and we agreed I would talk to him on the Wednesday before the Friday. When we talked on that Wednesday, he was a bit, you know, I could see it was a bad time, and he had a lot of things going on, and he went, I can't do the show today. I'm going, Doc, it's not for today, it's for Friday. Well, I can't do the show today. And I realized, you know, he was just in a bit of a tiz. So I said, okay, and I just walked away and never did anything. But listeners to the show know that I excerpt Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy often. And somebody went to the website and talked to one of his people and said, you know, the reason I know about this is because of this show, and I exchanged emails, and Coleman came on. I think this is the first time he broke his silence in years. And so it was just one of those things about, I guess, you know, doing a good turn and not asking for anything back, and it came back. And plus, I'll be honest with you also, he does want to promote the 4th edition of Conspirators Hierarchy. So, I mean, there's something there. He may go on other shows. I don't know. This would probably be a good time, Kent, you know, to go and talk to him, because certainly there was this belief, whether it was urban legend or not, that he had been threatened never to come on again. But that doesn't seem to be the case, so that was a home run.
Yeah, I have to say.
And I don't hit many. So
extremely impressed to hear that, because he's a fascinating man. I've spoken to him personally in his office in Vegas, or somewhere in Nevada.
In Nevada, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not in Vegas, it's somewhere else in Nevada. And I found him to be very compelling and very believable in what he was presenting. And I just have to say, hats off to you, brother. That is excellent to hear.
Well, anyway, why don't you just go ahead and we'll talk about this after, and give him a buzz and see if the ice hasn't broken. You know, like I said, I don't know all the particulars, but I was more than happy, and like I said, maybe it's just something, you know, a good turn that, you know, was returned, you know, 2-3 years later, and that's fine, you know, that's fine. So, but anyway, he's got the 4th edition out. He's also got a book out about the Satanic Rothschild Dynasty. That's a good title catcher, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also about Tavistock, which is very, very interesting. So, this is a good time, and I think you reference the fact we spoke, if you don't mind, and we'll see what happens, but go for it, because if it's an open door now, which it has not been for some time, well, go through it if you can.
Yeah, I will definitely let you know how that works out.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you know, even the dumb get lucky sometimes, bro. So, I have no illusions as to what I'm about, but sometimes you fall in the good stuff, and sometimes you fall in the bad stuff. So.
Well, you know, you try hard, and every once in a while you get rewarded for trying hard, and that's good too.
One of the things also, let's get back to where we were going, but one of the things I'm trying to figure out, I've done a series on Orwell, you know, by Ian Slater's book.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody other than Slater placed Orwell in Tavistock, which would slant to a certain degree what he really meant with Animal Farm in 1984. But Coleman was really adamant. He said no. I mean, he holds Orwell in the highest regard and said he would have nothing to do with them, which is pretty interesting. So anyway, So much for that. But the story will always go on with Orwell. But I tell you what, I'll go to my grave believing that he was more our friend than he was, somebody who was laughing at the way things would work out for us.
Yeah, as far as Dr. Coleman, I have a lot of his research white papers, particularly the ones he did a few years back about Tavistock and about the Rothschilds. And, when I got this information, I went to fact check everything, like I do periodically and randomly with various things from time to time, just to make sure of its authenticity and so forth. And there has never been any factual information of his that I haven't been able to verify. So I've placed Coleman on a very high level in terms of accuracy and integrity in the message. And I know he's very upset about his continuously getting ripped off by other researchers and, claim that the research is theirs and all this type of thing. Because he and I have talked about that issue personally. But at the same time, I'm very happy to hear about the new publications of the update addition to the Conspirators Hierarchy, and in particular the Tavistock material, because that is extremely important stuff.
Well, when we were talking, I had said to him that a couple of years ago I interviewed the biographer of Edward Bernays, who was America's first public relations man back in 1921. Interestingly, at the same time, the Council on Foreign Relations was begun. And Bernays had, his uncle was Sigmund Freud. And he went over to the continent and spent much time with Freud and basically applied Freud's, I wouldn't say methodology because Freud wasn't using it, but his theories and such. Coleman places Bernays in Tavistock. And I asked Larry Tye, the biographer, about that, and it was a very interesting last 10 minutes of the show. Let's just put it that way. Larry wasn't real happy with me. And I told that to Coleman, and Coleman goes, "What do you expect?" I said, "Well, that's true, but I mean, what's the big deal? Most people don't even understand Tavistock. But without Tavistock, I think you would agree, and without its component in the United States, the Stanford Research Institute, manipulators of mind operations, they are nonpareil in what they do, and very few people know about it, and that's the greatest thing about them, because they can do this stuff in the shadows and nobody really believes they're there. And when you call them out, and this is what happens, you get called a conspiracy theorist, and it's like, well, I'll tell you what, you're half right, because it's a conspiracy, man, but it ain't no theory.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, if you want to check it out, go ahead, but do not tell me I'm wrong unless you want to go down that hole that I've been down. So, that's why I'm getting a little tired of hearing that conspiracy theory crap. But you see, here's another thing that's been foisted on people. It certainly is a psychological operation, isn't it? To get everybody to say when they haven't encountered what you tell them, then the first thing that comes into their mind, you can see it's already happened to them, they're like, conspiracy theorist. And it's like, no, that knee-jerk reaction shows you exactly what's happened to you. And I tell you what, more times than not, it works. Because it's like, yeah, you see? And what do you think that's hiding? The fallacy? No, it's hiding the truth. And you folks, embrace it every day. So, at any rate, what I also was looking for is I could find that adolescent literature book that dealt with the sunglasses. It's not that big a deal, I guess. But I do find it interesting, so I'm going to track it down and see if it has any foundation with, Nelson's work. But let's go back to the movie. I don't know if there's anything you want to sum up or introduce that we haven't touched upon with They Live, Carpenter's movie.
Well, I guess what I could say about this is that what John Carpenter wanted to get across here more than anything else was that he wanted people to understand that he personally had deep concerns about this period in our history and in our future too.
Was he a good guy, do you think? Was this a warning? This is what we always talk about.
Yeah.
Was this a warning to us?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, what I was interested in finding out about this was whether this was just some sort of this is my next movie and it's kind of interesting and kind of provocative and, we'll leave it at that, or if he was trying to put a message across. In fact, when I did speak with him about this, it was completely, there's a message here. And what's interesting about this film is that this man has made, 40, 60 films or something like that. It's quite a list of films that he's made. And he considers They Live to be his personal favorite out of all the films he's made in his, 50-plus years as a filmmaker. This is TV films. This is, theatrical releases. And this even includes his work after 1988, which there's some pretty good movies after 1988 that he's made. And he still refers to They Live as his personal high point in his career. And he frequently, when he does interviews about current movies, for example, that he's releasing, he will mention They Live. If the interviewer doesn't, and it will frequently be in the context of, this was my best experience, my favorite film out of everything I've done, and here's the reason why, because it was a cautionary tale about the economic collapse of the United States and what's going to happen as a result of all this.
But that book also the movie also seems to be something that centers on conditioning, what we were talking about, mind operations, psych operations on people. Has he ever done anything other than that movie that, whether it's, on top or whether it's, subtextual, that focuses on that particular, obviously truism of what's happening and has happened in our lifetime?
Yeah, that was something I was interested in hearing about too, and he describes himself as just a horror film maker and not this big truth teller, because I had complimented him and I had said, that I really respected what he did with They Live because it was a very excellent tool for education that I was able to use with quite a few people in my life. And he's like, hey man, I'm just, a guy who makes wild movies. That's it.
You don't believe that though, do you? Do you think he was just, I don't know, what do you believe? Do you believe he was shooting straight with you?
Well, actually, what I personally believe is that he was downplaying that at that point. And the reason why he would want to downplay that is because he may not want to have excessive focus on this one issue. And in terms of an allegory or a message to the viewer of They Live, he would want them to walk away from that movie as having experienced a little bit of truth and a little bit of wild storytelling going hand in hand. So he is kind of working within a very specific framework and still managing to fit in some truth-telling at the same time. Interestingly enough, when we were concluding our time together and so forth, he had sent me a letter, which was very nice of him to do, and it hangs, I framed it, and it hangs in my office here. And what's interesting is that in this letter, the very last sentence that he says in this letter is the following: I am not certain about what we will find when we strip the veil of illusion from human eyes and finally reveal the truth underneath. My personal dread is that everything is being controlled by used car salesmen.
That's beautiful.
So he says, I tell wild tales, no more. And then he will make a statement, I'm not certain, what's going to happen when we strip away the veil, yada, yada, yada. And it kind of like one flies in the face of the other. And so I knew at that point he was kind of having fun with me,
okay. All right.
at the same time. And that's probably the way I would play it, too, if I was him. Because don't forget here, this is a man who needs funding for his films. And he can't afford to piss off the people that are going to fund those future projects for him. Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, he needs to be true to himself as an artist and himself in terms of his message that he's conveying to his audience.
But what is your opinion? As far as you know, as far as you go, as far back or ahead with what he's done cinematically, well, it's all that he does, do you believe he's ever done anything like that again? That might have multi-layers?
Not that I've seen. Not quite to this extent. And again, the genre that he works in is, horror. And there's not much of a opportunity to put that type of subtext into a horror film. It's been done before, obviously, with films like Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, and all of that series. But at the same time, I just haven't seen anything quite that multi-layered that he's done, John Carpenter, beyond They Live.
Well, I'll just say this. You can look at Frankenstein, and that was a tremendous work that's really never gotten, I guess, the underpinning of what that was all about at the time. It's pretty much sold as a horror flick, on surface, and nothing really behind it. And yet there's plenty behind it. And I don't know that anybody, even in the remake they had with De Niro, I believe it was, and such, that had ever touched upon that. I still believe that those who have decided to write science fiction / maybe a bit horror, of the classic nature, if I could qualify that, are trying to tell us something about either the way we have lived, or the way we do live, or the way we will live. So, that's pretty heavy, isn't it?
I think with Frankenstein, actually, it's interesting you bring up that film, because what I find interesting about Frankenstein relates to what we're going through right now. And it's a perfect story that talks about issues related to illegal immigration, xenophobia, which is fear of outsiders, and all of that type of idea that we're going through right now at this very time, with all this garbage about the border and all this illegal immigration that's been going on.
Well, also, let's not forget that it also was involved with creating life. Regalvanization from Galvani, who thought he could, I guess, reanimate life through through electric impulses. Therefore, we had lightning give life to Frankenstein. So, and also the whole idea, about the writer going through what was really, she lost her husband. Shelley drowned on her. I think she lost a child. I mean, and then she also, it's a bit of a feminist novel either, and not bad at whatsoever. So that's another book that really has a number of layers that's pretty interesting, and I haven't looked at it for about, maybe 12 years. But again, I just find it very interesting about science fiction. There's no such thing as science fiction. I mean, we said this at the outset of the show. I think that whoever's doing that is trying to couch it deliberately or whatever for those who actually get it. And I think that's probably one of the, to me, that's a craft and a half, to be able to tell you a story and then have it mean something else underneath it. Many try, few succeed. And yet these masters, even in something as short as Nelson's book or in Asimov's, I mean, it was just packed. I mean, how can you say more in so few pages and have it resound so much amongst us? Not that we're elites, but because we get it. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
All right, well, look, you want to tie anything up? Otherwise, we'll piss on a fire and call in the dogs and get on back to Bowlegs. So,
all I wanted to basically say is thank you once again for having me on. And to the listeners, if they're interested in checking out my work, my websites are controversyypapers.net and controversytapes.net. The Controversy Tapes podcast is available at the second website and also through the iTunes Music Store.
All right, and I appreciate you staying a little bit longer and wanting to chat a bit about things other than where we were, and I kind of like it. I think the listeners do too, so I appreciate the fact you're willing to do that and spend a little OT
sure,
with us.
I enjoy conversations that, go everywhere and under the sun. It's interesting. I like doing that.
Well, this brain, you can never tell where it's going, so I'm glad you can countenance that. At any rate, we will check out the website. You got the podcast happening now. And by the way, how deep are you into that now? How many shows do you have up there?
Well, there's 6 up so far. Number 7 goes up today. In fact, I'll be doing that when we're finished.
Okay.
And new episodes will be coming out every Monday.
All right, good deal. So you know that people can look forward, come every Monday.
Yep.
As this one will also come out July 16th, which is, by the way, what week is this? Yeah, it's the 9th. Forget, I think it's Christmas. This will be, you know what I mean? I don't know about you, but I got a calendar and I write all these things down on it. And I'm so far ahead, that I said to my wife, it'll be Christmas soon. And she said, what are you talking about? It's July. I'm telling you. I said, it'll be tomorrow. Things just, and I think also the older you get, the quicker things go. I'm not sure about that, but
it sure does seem
that way. That's right.
It does seem like it.
So actually, you'll be on our anniversary week. We will have ended 5 years. The week of July 16th, July 17th, 2002 is when we came out with the first half-hour show, the first show ever. And so we always like to go back and take a look. So anyway, thanks for being with us during that celebration week.
Oh, super. Thank you for having me.
It was an accident, but you're welcome. All right. Listen, I'll get back to you with a bunch of information, and I have to. So I'll be emailing and getting some stuff to you, okay?
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you again, Viz.
All right, no problem, brother. We'll see you later.
Okay.
Bye-bye.